Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and today we'll be taking a look at the Call of Cthulhu scenario, The Dare. Written by Kevin Ross and Brett Kramer and published in 2020 by Sentinel Hill Press after a long-delayed and possibly cursed Kickstarter campaign. The adventure is a one-shot scenario, possibly a character origin story scenario, set in the 1980s on Halloween night, and all of the player characters are children ages 10 to 13 who have been dared to spend the night in a haunted house, much like the Kids on Bikes RPG that kickstarted around the same time, which emulates those 1980s kids adventure stories like The Goonies, E.T., Monster Squad, and most recently Stranger Things. However, The Dare is more like It Chapter 1.
Meaning that this scenario is way less Steven Spielberg and way more Stephen King. And we're talking about the 1980s Stephen King here, who hadn't gotten all sentimental yet and really loved his cocaine.
Wow, look at you all dressed up.
Yeah, pretty sweet, huh? Though my tongue keeps getting caught in the mouth slit. But I managed to get a little bit of trick-or-treating done before I came over.
What'd you score? Show me the loot.
Let me see here. Mike was giving out full-size Snickers bars. His place is really popular, let me tell you. And then when I went to Todd's, the lights weren't on, so I really had to bang on the door. And finally, when he opened the door, he kind of looked around nervously, and all he gave me was a freaking fortune cookie, which, I don't know. I mean, he seemed to be eating Chinese takeout at the time, but hey, fortune cookies are good, no complaints there. But Dweebles gave me a freaking apple.
Yeah, if that came from Dweebles, I'd check that one for razor blades.
Yeah, that was just an urban legend spurred on by the satanic panic.
I was just referring to Dweebles in general. Coming in at 62 pages, the booklet is pretty thick, but the adventure itself is pretty short. It's intended to be played in 4 hours, and even with my feet-dragging players, it really just took us about 5 hours to complete it. Now, part of that page count is taken up by a modified Call of Cthulhu rules set, which they referred to as Call of Kid-Thulhu, which is rules for playing children. The provided character sheet is one single-sided page in glorious 1980s coloring. The condensed rules include combining certain skills, such as climbing, jumping, swimming, and throwing, have all been condensed into one skill called Gym Class. And they've added some new kids' skills, such as playing with matches, which is all the stuff your parents told you never to do, and Taunt. In addition to rules on making your own tween player characters, the module provides us with 10 pre-generated characters, all of which are wonderful. I knew every single one of these people when I was a kid. I suggest that game masters that are letting their players choose which character they want, only tell them what the archetype of the character is, the prankster, the athlete, the know-it-all, etc., and let the details about each character be a surprise once the player gets it. We also get an assortment of character portraits to go with the player characters that are done in a yearbook fashion, so the player just chooses which picture is their kid, and that's the one they are. Personally, if for nothing else, this adventure is worth it for the Call of Kid-Thulhu rules alone. I would love to see more adventures out there using this rule set. It was a huge hit with my players and I. Now, the adventure itself was a ton of fun to play. It comes with information for being able to play it in one of two modes, the edited for television PG version and the R-rated version, which of course when we played it, we did the R-rated version. However, as much as I enjoyed this scenario, there are several issues with it that game masters will need to be aware of before they run it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. My criticisms, my tips, and my suggestions as a game master who has successfully run this adventure.
Hey, and I'm the Bat. But you can call me Jack the NPC. I'm here to give it to you from a player's side of things as I forgo my Halloween night of getting free candy to go inside of a haunted house with a child-eating horror. And why the hell did I even sign up for this gig? This sounds like a really bad deal to me.
But before we enter the Barnaker house, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. Glorious, glorious spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your game masters this way to see if the dare is right for you. But if you keep watching and you spoil yourself, Jack is going to steal your candy. Okay, Game Masters, let's dive in. The backstory is that 120 years ago, Evelyn Barnaker, an evil witch, built her home. Using her grandmotherly demeanor, she lured children into the house who she fed on in order to maintain her immortality. Eventually, though, her body began transforming, forcing her to hide in the tunnels beneath her house. Now, many owners have since lived in the house since then, but they all suffered terrible fates. The last family fled the home after the disappearance of their children 20 years ago, and the house has remained abandoned ever since. However, the time has come where Evelyn must sacrifice multiple children to the dark gods that she serves, so she's devised a plan in order to bring a large number of children to her. 5 days ago, school bully and budding criminal Roger Simmons was lured into the house, which he intended and tried to burn down. However, Evelyn ended up murdering him and reanimated his corpse, or more accurately, filled his empty skin with thousands of crawling bugs and animated that into being her servant. Now under his master's control, Roger has dared several school children to spend their Halloween night inside the Barnaker house, which those children are the player characters. Now my first criticism here is that the module is called the Dare, but it really doesn't spell out exactly what the Dare is. At least it doesn't spell it out all in one place. So have it be where the characters have to spend the entire night inside the house up until sunrise. So maybe you can say that Roger has stolen something from all the player characters, a different item from each of them, and he's promised to give these items back if they complete this dare, or maybe he's somehow convinced them and he's going to stop bullying them if they just spend the night in the Barnaker house, and for whatever reason they've decided to believe him on that. The details don't really matter as much, we just need a reason to explain why they're here in the first place, but I feel that it can add something to the adventure if we tell the players up front what it is those characters have at stake, or what they might lose or gain if they complete this dare, and exactly what the rules of the dare are. The scenario opens as the characters and Roger are standing before the old Barnaker house. Daylight is fading and a storm is blowing in. Now for my game, I asked each of the players what it was that they were going to be wearing for Halloween, and whether they had snuck out of their house or told their parents that they were going to be staying somewhere for the night somewhere. So, and if they were going to be staying somewhere, where were they going to be staying? So we had two of the characters, they told their parents that they were staying at each other's house. Another one was a Boy Scout, so he told his parents that he was staying at a Boy Scout lock-in. And I also asked the players if there was going to be anything else that their characters wanted to bring in addition to what was listed on their character sheets.
Yeah, then I want to put on my character sheet that I got an Uzi, and also a sweet ninja katana. Wait, no, 2 sweet ninja katanas. You can never have too many ninja katanas.
GMs, depending on your players, you might need to veto some of their more lofty answers here, or at least find out how it is that as 12-year-old children, they're going to be able to get some of this other stuff that they might want, which means we might be able to do some skill checks, on sneaking or, trying to get all this stuff. Now for my group, most of the players, the stuff that they added was stuff like, blankets, sleeping bags, flashlights, and of course, cans of tuna and other food for them to eat overnight. I also suggest that you mention that there were supposed to be some other children that showed up, some of the other pre-generated characters, but they didn't show up, and Roger's losing his patience and he just calls them a bunch of chickens and opens the gate and lets everybody inside. And the reason that I'm suggesting that is that way you can use those pre-generated characters that aren't here as kind of emergency backup characters in case something happens to one of the player characters a little bit too early on in the adventure where they're incapacitated or killed. We can then use one of those other characters for them to play. I also added a street light here with a poster on it for Miss Ward's missing Scottish Terrier Rex, as well as some older and faded missing pet posters underneath it. Nice little foreshadowing of what's going on around here. Now exploring the grounds, it's pretty straightforward. It has a few hazards such as poison ivy and a water-filled cistern that they might fall into. There's also some great weapons and supplies inside the old shed. Now eventually though, Roger's going to start calling them out on the fact they're delaying going inside, and the rain begins falling, and Roger's calling them fraidy cats, so eventually the player characters are going to enter the house. Now, once they are inside, Roger's going to pull out an old key and lock the door, saying that it's to ensure that they don't chicken out and try to leave before sunrise.
Roger, why do you have a key to the front door here?
When asked this, I just had Roger huff.
It's a skeleton key, dumbass. I lifted it from my dad.
I have to admit that getting to play Roger was a lot of fun to do. I got to channel every school bully that I ever knew, and it was kind of cathartic really getting to play him. Roger's also going to draw some candles from his backpack and start setting them up around the house. Now, he's going to tell them that it's for light, but the truth is that this is all part of Evelyn's spell. So keepers should make this seem very natural for him to do. Don't try to draw too much attention to it. Maybe say, with a storm coming and how dark the house is because there's no power there, and Roger yells, lights a candle once they start getting there, and he just maybe just kind of sets it up near the door, and when they go in the next room, he pulls out another candle and lights that, kind of make it seem natural. But the other good thing about it is it's an opportunity for Roger to leave the player characters as he goes around the house setting up these different candles, and it allows the player characters to be alone without him in order to talk and explore the house a bit. The module gives us several maps for this house. Unfortunately, the maps and the room descriptions don't always line up. For example, in the dining room, the description says how the ceiling is damaged by a slow leak, and characters walking in the room above this may fall through the floor. Now, that room is the master bedroom. However, when you're reading the description for the master bedroom, it doesn't mention anything at all about the floor or how characters might fall through it. It's just been totally forgotten about, and unless you've been looking back to where the dining room is, keepers are going to forget about this. So I mentioned when the player characters did reach the upstairs bedroom how the floor was kind of bowed and warped and moldy. There were little bitty mushrooms growing around it. So any characters that were trying to cross this obviously damaged part of the floor, they were going to have to make a gym class or a dodge roll in order to avoid falling through the floor. Next, the upper floor's description says that the bathroom is on a landing between the two floors, but the bathroom on the map is pretty clearly on the second floor. The upper floor also has somewhere between 3 and 5 ways to reach the attic. There's trapdoors in both the hallway and the master bedroom. There's also stairs leading up there, but the room descriptions go on to say that there's a trapdoor in the girls' bedroom closet that leads to the small attic space upstairs, which it can't because the large attic space is above the girls' bedroom, and also the sewing room is said to have stairs that are leading up to the cupola, which they don't appear on the map here, so I suggest that Game Masters just ignore those two entrances. The cupola already has stairs that are leading up to it from the main attic room, and I'm not entirely sure how that other stairway is supposed to fit in there. Now, speaking of the attic floor only describes the first attic room. The large attic space beside it, and you can get through a doorway to it, isn't described in the attic floor section, but is instead described in the upper floor section of the book about the master bedroom, sort of like a subsection of that room. The small attic space is described as a subsection of the girls' bedroom, which, again, according to the map, can't even lead to the small attic space. Now, these issues with the map and the room descriptions, as well as the sub-basement, which we'll get to the sub-basement later on in this video, these are my biggest complaints and criticisms about the module itself. So when my players, they were upstairs in the main attic and they were getting attacked by bat things, two of the characters, they ran into the large attic space, but I then had to scour the book just to find the description of that part of the house because it wasn't in the attic floor plan portion of the module, but buried as a subsection of a bedroom on a different floor below it, so it was extremely annoying trying to navigate the module once we got up to the attic portion. So keepers, go ahead before the game, prepare for this, and get yourself organized in whichever way you can be organized in. Another section on page 24 is a note to see another page for more information, but has 2 X's listed there instead of the page number. The first floor family room on the map is called the living room inside the module text, and a lot of this book really feels like it really needed a final editing pass, especially one where the editor was comparing the map to the manuscript itself in order to find these discrepancies. Okay, back to the adventure. Once the characters are all inside the house, Evelyn's magic is going to seal up all the doors and windows, making it impossible for the characters to escape until dawn rises. The candles that Roger is placing around the house, in addition to allowing the player characters to see where they are, they allow Evelyn to listen in on any conversations that are going on around these burning candles. So maybe mark on your map where the candles are. Also, Evelyn can see and cast spells through mirrors, and there are several mirrors that are located around the house. Once again, I suggest that noting on your keeper's map where all the mirrors are located, because you're probably going to want to remember that. Now, once you've got everything in place and the characters are all locked in, it's time just to sit back and let them explore.
Explore? This is a creepy house, so screw that. Our plan is we're gonna hide out in the parlor, make a fire in the fireplace, maybe cook a few s'mores, and then just wait for sunrise.
Now, if your characters are hesitant to explore the house, you have several tools at your disposal. The first one, of course, is Roger. Next is Evelyn's familiar, Rastus. Now, I used Rastus to draw out one of the player characters from the parlor, by whispering the player character's name with kind of a, hey, come here. So the player character, they'll look around, trying to see who called them over into this other room. So eventually they kind of stepped into the other room outside the parlor parlor, and that's when I had Rastus attack that character and then run upstairs. To which point I then used Evelyn's Dampen Flame spell to put their fire out in the parlor, so all of a sudden, there's a cat attacks a player character, and then everything goes black.
We were convinced, or at least in character we were convinced, that Roger had some friends that were hiding upstairs that were ready to jump out and scare us. Now, out of character, we knew that we were playing Call of Kid-Thulhu and that something way worse was going down here. But in character, anytime we heard some sort of creepy noise or anything like that, we just assumed that it was that jerk-faced Roger and his friends trying to scare us.
Like with most Call of Cthulhu adventures, the key to this adventure is the mood. Keep this place creepy. In addition to run-ins with rats and bats that are scurrying around on the walls, have the player characters get glimpses of Evelyn in the mirror behind them, stress this raging storm that's going on outside and, water dripping down from the leaky ceiling above. Maybe you kind of see it running down the walls, kind of lifting up the wallpaper, maybe see something moving behind the wallpapers, one of the rats or something like that. And as this adventure escalates, have the broken alarm clock in the hallway begin chiming, or Evelyn might call them from the obviously broken kitchen phone. Now, exploring the house, they can find several clues up in the attic. Now, keepers, I recommend that you print this portion up in some sort of handout form and give this to your players, as that's going to give a good backstory, as well as clues about Evelyn's weaknesses to iron and silver. Now, speaking of iron and silver, Evelyn has removed all of that from the house because those things can harm her. However, she's missed a couple things. There's an iron fireplace poker that's downstairs and a collection of silver coins that's in one of the closets. Now, with the coins, none of the player characters that I was using, none of them had a slingshot, but using some of the tools from the basement, they were able to fashion a pair of clubs that they had studded with these silver coins. So, that way they were able to kind of beat on her later on with these kind of silver-studded clubs. So instead of saying how many coins they found in the collection, because, coin size could range anywhere from, a dime up to a silver dollar, I had the players just make a playing with matches roll or possibly a fixed stuff roll here, and depending on how well that roll went, that was able to determine how many silver-studded weapons that the player characters could make, and these weapons were really reminiscent of the weapons that my friends and I used to make when we were that age. Eventually things are going to begin escalating. In the locked master bedroom closet, they're going to find the strangled corpse of a homeless man.
Holy autoerotic asphyxiation! Is this in the PG version of this adventure? Because that just seems just a little bit too adult if you ask me.
Yeah, he is in the PG version, but he didn't die of autoerotic
Yeah, that's what they always say. Just like with Carradine. But we know the truth of what happened. Oh, we know.
Anyway, characters that are noticing the body's severed hand and they make their spooky stuff roll might recall the Hand of Glory being made from the severed hand of a hanged victim. Now, it's at this point, if he hasn't revealed himself already, Roger is going to slip away and retrieve the kitchen knife that he stashed around somewhere, and he's going to reveal himself as the villain that he is.
This ended up being one hell of a great fight for us. So Roger, he was trying to hide that knife behind his back, and he was trying to lure one of the player characters away, but we quickly spotted that. One of the other player characters, he had the fireplace poker, so he ran up and he hit Roger right upside the head. But instead of cracking open his skull, his head just kind of bent around it like a beanbag chair. So on the next round, that player character said he was just going to drive that point straight through Roger's body, and he got an impaling strike, which means he shoved that fireplace poker all the way through him. And then, when he tried to pull it back out, the skin sack got caught in that little hook on the end, so it ended up just ripping and tearing that skin sack apart. So Roger's body, it fell into two pieces, the upper half and the lower half, and that's when we saw the thousands of squiggly little bugs just come pouring out of these skin sacks. We lost quite a bit of sanity for that, but it felt so good to shut that bully up for good.
The other threat that the player characters will face here are several rat and bat things that have been made from Evelyn's previous child victims. Now, the bat things in the attic, there are 1d6 of them, and we ended up with 5 of them at one time, so that ended up being the toughest fight in the entire game, and that's also where you had a player character die.
Yeah, that really was a bummer. But what freaked us out more than seeing our friend get murdered by monsters was when we came back up to the attic that we got to see a couple of those rat things dragging our buddy's corpse into a gap between the walls and down to God knows where.
I figured that Evelyn is going to quickly claim any of the children's bodies in order to devour them. Now, in the event that you do have any lost player characters, this is where the spare pre-generated characters come in. So the doors and the windows to the house cannot be opened or broken from the inside, but I figure that Evelyn is going to gladly allow any other player characters inside the house, any more children that she might be able to feed on. So I had it where when that player character died, I gave him another character sheet. That ended up being a kid that had gotten hung up somewhere and couldn't make it to the start time when everybody gathered outside the house. So he arrived at the house in the rain and opened the door, which is now unlocked because the player characters had unlocked the door after they'd killed Roger trying to open the door and get out of here. So he steps inside the house, shuts the door behind him, and begins calling for his friends, wondering where everybody was, which of course everybody upstairs suddenly freaks out as they hear this other voice downstairs calling him from below. And because they shut the door behind him, and that's when they realized that they couldn't open the door, and now all of them were trapped inside. So keepers, keep this in mind as a good way of bringing in a backup character in case one of the player characters dies and you want to keep that player playing the game and having fun. Now eventually the players are going to have to make a choice, either fight or flee, and my players of course chose to flee here. So they devised a plan where they might be able to crawl out of the large hole in the attic roof, and then using a rope that was made out of bed sheets and some cloth that they had found in the sewing room, climb down that to safety. Now, the bed sheets and all the descriptions inside the module are described to be rotted and full of rats' nests and all chewed up. However, I as a keeper made a mistake when the players were searching the sewing room and they're asking what all was in there, and they're kind of asking about different stuff they could find. I just casually mentioned there was a couple bolts of fabric in there, and I never imagined what it was that they were going to try to do with those later on, especially try to make some sort of prison rope out of it. Now, there is a huge bat thing that's lurking outside, and I knew that any of the player characters that were going to try to face off against this thing, it was going to be a death sentence. Either it was going to kill them, or if one of the player characters falls from the roof, that's going to be a death sentence. So instead of telling them how the cloth, once they got to it and they got a closer inspection on it, how, well, now it's actually rotted and it's no good, I decided to go ahead and use the candles that were around the house. They were ones allowing Evelyn to listen in, so she heard the plan of what it was they were talking about doing, so she sent a few of her rat things up there to destroy the fabric before the player characters could reach it. So once they reached the room, all of a sudden there were these two rat things in there just chewing and tearing up all the cloth, and they were like, oh my god, how'd they know these things were going to do this?
Which really wasn't hard for her to do, because we were carrying those candles around for light, completely unaware that they were working like microphones, so she got to hear everything we said.
Now, the characters still tried to do their rope trick, of course. They kind of took every single scrap of cloth that they could salvage together and kind of the world's least safest rope, which point the first kid that was able to squeeze through the hole in the roof, he saw this enormous bat thing that was flying around the building, so he promptly ducked back inside, abandoning that plan once and for all, thank God. So at that point, they decided to go ahead and head down to the basement where they were pretty sure Evelyn was hiding. In the basement, the PCs might discover Evelyn's moldy grimoire, which they might be able to salvage a single page from to get some useful information. Unfortunately, as cool as this handout looks between the archaic spelling and the slender script, I have no idea what this thing says. The characters, they can make a skill check in order to read it, but that doesn't do any good if the characters can read it if neither the game master or any of the players are able to read this. So I really wish that this module included a typed transcript of what it is this handout is supposed to say. Pulling aside the metal floor grate leads to a hidden sub-basement that Evelyn has dug out for herself. Now here there are several locations that are marked on this map, but the key to those locations and the room descriptions are completely different. So it should actually look more like this. So keepers, take note of what this looks like. In an alcove along the western wall sits the bloated and eyeless witch, Evelyn Barnaker. Now this should be dramatic, but one small detail that I added here is, they saw her and they were making all their sanity rolls against this, horrible monster, this witch that was sitting there talking to them, is at that moment I had her birth one of the rat things, and that rat thing had the face of the player character that had already died. You just kind of came popping out from between her legs, and it squeaked one of the player characters' names here.
Yeah, because nothing's quite like having your players, not the characters, the players, lose sanity during one of your games. What the hell is wrong with you, sicko?
Now, fighting Evelyn is going to be tough. Not only is she a formidable opponent by just standard Call of Cthulhu standards, but, the player characters here are children. They've got lowered stats, and they probably don't have much in the way of weapons. But Evelyn's also got a ton of her children in order to help her out, so this is going to be a tough fight. Now, the module does offer a few creative ways that the player characters might be able to defeat her if they kind of use what's around them, but none of those are going to be entirely easy. Now, once all the player characters have been devoured, or once they've defeated Evelyn, the adventure is done. We also get a few cool closing stories that game masters might give depending on how the adventure ends. Each of those in kind of that 80s classic horror movie fashion where it kind of shows that the threat might not be done and we might have 27 more sequels to go on top of this. Overall, despite my criticisms, I really enjoyed this adventure. It's a fresh kind of Call of Cthulhu scenario that really leans and feels like a 1980s horror movie. My players and I had an absolute blast with it. But keepers really will need to go over this adventure beforehand, especially the map. Make whatever notes and changes or anything that you need in order to correct this and organize it in a way that's the easiest to use in-game. And I really hope that Sentinel Hill Press goes back and gives kind of one final update to this and corrects a lot of the mistakes that I've pointed out. You can find the adventure on DriveThruRPG. If you're looking for a fun, single-session adventure, maybe for Halloween in a few months, I highly recommend checking the dare out.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, gamers, trick or treat. Yeah, this stuff could really use some vodka. Yeah, that's what they always say, just like with Carradine. But we know the truth of what happened. We know.